Hello, everyone. My name is Carl Payer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Agri-Food Innovation Council, and I'll be your moderator today. I'd like to welcome you all to the second panel of our virtual summit on agri-food research and innovation, looking ahead to 2025. Or welcome back if you had also joined us on Monday. I'd like to start by thanking Ulcer, Hoskin, and Harcourt LLP, Farm Credit Canada, AgWest Bio, and Smith, Petrie, Carr, and Scott Insurance Brokers for partnering with us for this event. Thank you. So today's panel focuses on presentations from Canada's AgriScience clusters and the Global Institute for Food Security. Before we begin with presentations, I have a few technical notes to share. The first one is that the chat bar will not be active for the attendees. That being said, you're welcome to ask your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you see a question in there that's been asked by another attendee that you like, you may upvote it in order to move it up in the queue. If you would prefer to ask your question verbally, feel free to use the raise hand button that's located right next to the Q&A button. Once you're identified, you'll be invited to unmute yourself and ask your question. So before I introduce our panelists, I would like to invite Mr. Tom Rosser, Assistant Deputy Minister for Market and Industry Services at Aafc, to say a few words. Tom was appointed in his current position in February this year. His responsibilities include trade negotiations, sectoral competitiveness, and departmental regional offices. Tom has joined Aafc as the ADM of Strategic Policy in 2017, where he was responsible for leading major policy issues on behalf of the department, including cabinet and intergovernmental affairs and implementing the food policy for Canada. Tom, thank you, and please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Carl, for the introduction, and thanks to you and AIC for the opportunity to join here today and offer a few thoughts at the outset of the session. Maybe I should begin just by acknowledging I'm joining you from the Ottawa area today, the traditional lands of the Algonquin First Nation. And Carl, I was able earlier in the week to join your session, or at least part of it, where the focus was on Strategic Innovation Fund and the Superclusters Initiative. And you know, I mean, there were some of the things there that Bill Gruhl and others that participated were really exciting. And I mean, the real emphasis with those ICED-led initiatives is to identify really high potential, high growth economic segments where Canada can compete to attain critical mass in a rapidly growing sector. And I mean, that's a really, I think, important part of the overall federal effort to accelerate innovation in the economy. But it's important to remember too, when we talk about innovation in the agri-food sector and federal partnership and support for it, that it didn't begin with superclusters, that we have a long and distinguished tradition in this country of innovation in the agriculture and agri-food sectors. As somebody who came to the agriculture world about 5 years ago, I guess now, and I worked a lot of my career previously in forestry and other natural resource sectors. I was really impressed with just the fluidity and the robustness of the partnerships you see in the agri-food sector in terms of between government-based researchers, university-based research, the private sector. And the clusters initiative is a really, I think, important glue to kind of bring those partners together in a sustained partnership. And to my knowledge, based on what I've seen of the innovation systems in other sectors of the economy, I'm not aware of a model, anything quite like it. And it is and remains a foundational element of our department's support of innovation in the agri-food sector. Of course, the clusters are tied to our CAP, our policy framework. We are, if I've got my years right, I think about just completed year 3 of the 5-year agreement. So we're at the stage where we're starting to think in a fairly serious way about how we use the upcoming negotiations with provinces and territories to evolve the broader suite of programming under the CAP to make sure it's as modern and as possible, as responsive as possible to the priorities of both government and industry. And thinking about a way forward on the superclusters is obviously an important part of that. It's a significant suite of funding under the current framework. I've got the figure here. It's $338 million over 5 years. We have a total of 19 clusters in the network. Maximum funding per cluster is $20 million a year, and I think maximum per project is $5 million. I mean, others on the panel likely have more familiarity with the history of the clusters initiative than I do, but I see it as sort of something that is sort of a mix of continuity and change. Some of the clusters date back, I think, to the very earliest framework agreements. Others, I think we're going to hear later on today about the automation cluster. That's a relatively new one. Several of the 19 current clusters are new to the CAP, have just come into being in the past few years. Others go back many frameworks prior. And I think it's just a reflection of how with successive policy frameworks, we try to evolve the suite, try to maintain core partnerships in support of innovation, but also change the suite to reflect changing research and policy priorities, of both government and industry. And I think that will be part of the process this time, and it's just getting underway. We're beginning stakeholder consultations. I know I've had a couple of meetings with representatives of some of the clusters already thinking about how they want to evolve their research programs and suites of activity moving into the next framework. I guess I would say, as well, as I look from a government standpoint at what our priorities are for the years ahead and for the next policy framework. I mean, at risk of stating the obvious, I think innovation has always been foundational, to what the department does, and it becomes more important as ever as we think to the future. We think about the government having established, having identified agri-food as a sector for recovery and long-term sustainable growth in the economy. We have, of course, an export target. We have ambitions to grow the economic contribution of the agri-food sector. Government has also established some ambitious climate goals via the Paris Agreement. There was the climate plan in December, and several elements of that had a significant focus on primary agriculture and agri-food. We saw further funding announced in the budget, federal budget of a couple of weeks ago. And so we think about the twin challenges of continuing to grow the sector while augmenting our ambition on reducing its carbon and environmental footprint. Innovation becomes key to simultaneously doing both of those things. And I mean, certainly the idea of environment and environmental priorities is not new to clusters, but it's an area where I think we're going to see an increasing focus in the subsequent framework. And I know many of those active in clusters are thinking about what that means in various commodity groups. I'd mentioned automation being a new cluster, of course, labor availability, labor productivity. Those two are big priorities for the agri-food value chain, an area where government wants to be a partner in the process, and something else that I think will be an important consideration as we think about how to evolve the suite. I am mindful. You'd think by now I would be used to speaking at virtual events, and I am slowly getting used to it. But one of the challenges I find is when you can look out at an audience, you can at least delude yourself into thinking that you can see if people are engaged or if they're bored. Really hard to do that in this environment. And for that reason, I don't want to take up too much time and also I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of the other panelists about who will talk, I think, in more specific terms about the kinds of research that that's supported through the cluster network. Maybe just one final thought that I was remiss perhaps in not mentioning already, and that was beyond climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, the environmental footprint of the industry. Important, not just to attaining the government's targets for decarbonizing the broader economy, but increasingly important from an industry standpoint for public trust, for branding of Canadian products as being not just of high quality, but also sustainable, something that we hear more and more about, more and more important to consumers, to customers of the agri-food value chain, both domestically and internationally. The other element where I think research and innovation in the clusters have and will continue to play a growing role is in adaptation to climate change, as we developing crop varieties that are more resilient to extreme climate events has, I think, long been a focus of our research efforts. We have seen in recent years in the grains and oilseed sector have seen near record harvests in conditions and drought type conditions that would have led to really severe consequences in decades past, in say the 1980s. Through research and innovation, we can increase yields, we can reduce input intensity, the environmental footprint of the industry. We can also, research and innovation is also key to building an industry that is more adapted and resilient to a changing climate. I mean, like I said, that isn't something that's new to the clusters, but how we make it, how we evolve it, how we ensure that appropriate emphasis is placed on that in the cluster initiative going forward is, I think, another area where we will be doing some reflection in the coming months. And in the interest of time, Carl, I think I'll leave it at that and pass it back to you, but looking forward to the panel.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this very good overview. Definitely a lot of interesting points to think about as we start looking at the Canadian Agricultural Partnership after 2023 and what that will mean for the AgriScience cluster. So I would like now to briefly introduce our panelists. We have Reynold Bergen. Reynold has been Science Director for the Beef Cattle Research Council since 2010. In his capacity, he is responsible for explaining research to cattle producers and explaining cattle producers to researchers. Next, we have Tania Humphrey. Tania is Vice President, Research and Development at Vineland Research and Innovation Center. She's responsible for developing the strategy and guiding the direction of Vineland's innovation portfolio to maximize its real-world impact. Tania also serves as Vice Chair of the board for the Agri-Food Innovation Council. Stewart Cressman. Stewart has served as Chair of Swine Innovation Porc since 2013. He is also Chair of the Agricultural Institute of Ontario, which provides research advice to Ontario's Deputy Minister and Minister of Agriculture, facilitates the establishment of research priorities, and provides oversight of competitive research funds as well as research properties. He has been a beef and pork producer on a fourth-generation family farm since 1980, which currently consists of a 2,400 head swine finishing barn. And last but not least, Steve Webb. Steve has served as the CEO of the Global Institute for Food Security since 2019. And prior to joining the Institute, Steve has spent 23 years with Corteva AgriScience as the R&D Director of External Technology, in which he was responsible for leading many research collaborations across the globe. So each panelist will have 12 to 15 minutes to give their presentation. And after the presentation, we'll take questions from the audience, which you're welcome to ask at any time. So Reynold, I will ask you to please go ahead.
All right, can you see some slides? Yes, super. Okay, again, I'm Reynold. I work for the Beef Cattle Research Council, and thanks for inviting me into your basement to speak to you today. Um, are my slides advancing? They're not. That? Okay, all right. The BCRC has grown a lot over the years. We've got a lot going on right now. There's a list of things that we're leading. But a number of years ago, we were really small. We had a really small budget when we started out 20 years ago. We're producer funded and we're producer led. And so back when we had a really small budget, we had to focus on research that was very applied and very producer relevant. Now, as an industry, our three primary goals are to improve economic sustainability and production efficiency, to improve public trust, and to improve consumer confidence in beef demand, which is really important because, you know, half of our production is exported. But early on, limited funds meant that we could really only focus on the economic sustainability and production efficiency goals. And what the science clusters programs allowed us to do is to diversify and expand our activities. So instead of funding 2 or 3 one-off projects per year, now we can fund a broad portfolio of larger, more collaborative, multi-institutional and cross-disciplinary projects that represent all of our priority areas. You know, we still fund research that has immediate producer relevance, but we're also now funding higher level public trust, economic and environmental sustainability research as well. You know, we've always been as strategic as we can about our funding, but you know, due to the cluster, our strategy had to evolve. So we developed our first formal strategy back as we planned for the first cluster in 2008. But this wasn't just BCRC strategy, it's the national beef strategy. And we developed this together with other Canadian beef research funders so that they would adopt it as well. We brought this strategy in-house as we planned for the second cluster, and we refreshed it again for the third cluster, and we're currently updating it now because strategies need to evolve. Now, this is what our current cluster funding portfolio looks like. But I'm going to focus a bit on a couple of examples of how our evolving strategy has informed our approach to research. It's been an iterative process. And each iteration of the research strategy builds on the progress we've achieved since the previous strategy was launched, and the programming in each cluster is based on the knowledge we've gained and the gaps we've identified in the previous clusters. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. I'm going to give an animal health and welfare example and an environment example, and I'm going to demonstrate how they're both tied to our tech transfer efforts. You know, we've always funded a ton of animal health research, but we discovered a big knowledge gap after the first cluster. And that gap was that on the feedlot side, they knew what their animal health priorities were, but the cow-calf sector didn't. It was kind of strange. The vast majority of research funding was going towards issues that most people didn't seem to even be aware of. But nobody had a real clear grasp of what was causing them the most grief. We didn't have, and nobody had, really good animal health intel. And so we developed the Western Canadian Cow-Calf Surveillance Network under the second cluster. And in this project, we had researchers who identified veterinarians all across the prairies who had clients who were willing to share their production records and collect soil and feed and fecal and blood samples. And this project successfully gathered information about a number of different issues that have really helped us to get a much better idea of what the cow-calf sector's research priorities need to be. And that has informed our programming going forward. Now, one of these production surveys was done by Dr. Claire Windeer at the University of Calgary, looking at calving management practices. And she found that about half of pre-weaning calf deaths occur within a day after birth. And a large proportion of those are due to calving difficulties. So it's really, really important to get those calves resuscitated quickly, but it's just as important to get them resuscitated properly. And so she did this survey, and she found that over 90% of producers prefer to resuscitate calves just by rubbing them vigorously or poking them in the nose. And that's effective. But she also found that half of them considered that hanging a calf upside down to be an effective resuscitation option. And that used to be the recommendation. And that kind of looks effective because fluid comes pouring out of their mouth when you do that. But it's not effective because that fluid's not coming from the lungs. It's actually coming from the stomach. And when you do hang a calf upside down, the stomach presses down on the lungs and makes it even harder for them to breathe. And so, you know, just like we used to hang babies upside down and slap them, we don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore with calves either. So anyway, these researchers made a simple video that we launched in January, just before the calving season, to show producers the right way to resuscitate a calf. And that video reached 50,000 views on social media within a couple of days. And we've got 55,000 beef producers in Canada. So we're pretty happy with that reach. Now, based on the extent of the success of that network, we expanded it under the third beef cluster to include researchers and sites all across Canada, BC, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada were added to this, so that all regions of the country are represented now. And we're using information from this network together with information from outside the cluster to better understand animal health and overall management practices and challenges on cow-calf operations all across the country. And we've identified baselines and benchmarks for improvement. And we're continually refocusing and refining our tech transfer efforts based on the practices that producers are adopting and which practices more producers could benefit from. So we've got an array of different approaches we used. I mentioned the video, but we've also got topic pages for people who like to read. And we've got webinars for people who like to watch and people who like to interact with the experts. And we've got tools to help producers decide whether adopting a new management practice or a new technology makes economic sense on their operation. And they can compare their performance with regional production benchmarks that are coming from all these surveys we do. So I'll give you an example of how that works. We funded some pain control research during the second cluster. And this was one of those public trust issues that we could not afford to fund before the cluster program existed. So this team looked at how effectively some new drugs are for reducing castration pain in young calves. And they did all this research and they published it all. And they found better ways to manage castration pain. But not too many producers read research papers. And so we blogged about it every time they came out with a new study. And we made a topic page for people who wanted to read more, and we made a video for people who wanted to watch more, and we held webinars for people who had questions, and we had an in-person tech transfer session at our first Canadian Beef Industry Conference. And then we discovered that some vets weren't even aware that all these new pain drugs were available, and so we created a complete list for them to refer to as well. So when they're getting producer questions, they can give them good advice. And then we used our arsenal of producer surveys to track adoption. And we've seen adoption of pain drugs increase from about 4% back in 2013 when those first drugs started to become available, up to as high as 25 to 30% in some regions of the country. And the interesting thing to me is that research has never shown a production benefit from using pain drugs. They're an economic cost to the producer, but there's no economic benefit. And the code of practice does not currently require them before weaning. And so we've got an example here of producers who are making a purely ethical decision to change their management practices in a way that actually costs them money with no benefit, no clear benefit to them. Now, the second example I'm going to give you is about environment research. And this is sort of like our animal welfare research, where our focus on environmental research is pretty new for the same exact reasons. You know, when funds were limited, we had to focus it on stuff that benefited producers' bottom lines. And environmental research was a public good, and so we let the public fund it, and we stayed out of it. But today, being a beef producer is a lot like being a medical intern, and they both have a lot of people watching their operations. And in our case, beef operations are being watched by regulators, they're being watched by environmental NGOs, and by retail and food service players. And some of this attention is being driven by the sensational stories you'll sometimes come across, the myth information around water use in beef production, or greenhouse gases related to beef production, or land use related to beef production, or the impacts of that land use on biodiversity. And so by the time we started planning for the second cluster, we knew we had to do something environment related, but we didn't really know where to start. We didn't know what was known, let alone where more information was needed. But we knew that we had some sneaky researchers. We knew that when we funded Kim Ominski to do her cow feeding trials in Manitoba, that she was also collecting methane measurements on the sly. And we knew that when Alan was studying the growth and vigor of forage plants in Saskatchewan, he was also collecting carbon sequestration data. And we knew a lot of researchers were doing this. They were padding their budget a little bit to collect stuff that was of broader interest. And so we funded a benchmarking project to compile all that existing data and calculate how the environmental hoofprint of Canadian beef production has changed over the past 30 years in terms of greenhouse gas production and water use and carbon sequestration and biodiversity. And we learned some pretty cool things about Canadian beef and greenhouse gases and carbon sequestration and water use and biodiversity. But equally importantly, we learned where the data gaps are. And so under the third cluster, we started filling those data gaps regarding some of the common technologies that have led to these environmental improvements, as well as how beef producers and timber producers can work together to benefit the growth of both the forage and the forest, as well as the biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and watersheds in beef country. You asked something about collaboration. Here's one of our projects, biodiversity projects, that's involving Ag Canada, 3 universities, a provincial government, and 3 environmental NGOs across the prairies. And nowadays, this degree of collaboration really isn't unusual for us. This kind of research has also informed what we're funding outside of the cluster to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and measure carbon stocks on grassland and in cropland, and how preserving wetlands benefits beef production, the environment, and society. And some of this research is involving, some of these environmental NGOs that we would not have dreamed of working together with a number of years ago. It goes to show how fast things are evolving. And now looking forward, we've, as an industry, have developed some pretty ambitious goals that we hope to achieve over the next few years. These goals are very public facing, but production research and practice change will be key to achieving them. If we're going to achieve reductions in greenhouse gas emission intensities, we're going to need improvements in reproductive performance and growth rates and efficiency, as well as forage and feed productivity. And if we're going to sequester an extra 3.4 million tons of carbon per year on grasslands, we're going to need a better understanding of how pasture management practices can be improved to benefit both below ground soil health and carbon sequestration, as well as the above ground forage biomass. And if we're going to maintain our 35 million acres of native grassland that are still in existence, we're going to need to support research to understand the impact of grazing management on forage and animal productivity, as well as the ecosystem services like healthy wetlands and water cycles and biodiversity, as well as how grazing management impacts forage and animal productivity. Ensuring continued animal well-being is key to public trust. I talked about a little bit of that already. Now, some of this is going to require demonstration that we're continuing to develop and adopt better ways to raise and care for cattle. And in some ways, it may require rethinking of how we approach some things. So maintaining healthy gut and lung microbiome so that we can continue to have antimicrobials that are available to us and effective to safeguard animal health. Canada's beef demand index has been really strong for a number of years now. Beef's a high-priced protein, and consumers deserve the quality that they're paying for. And so research into beef quality and food safety is going to be key to ensuring this, both domestically and internationally. And there's environmental implications to this as well, because if we can increase the storage and shelf life of beef, we'll be able to reduce the amount of waste that gets thrown out at food service, retail, and consumer levels. And of course, technology is making things possible that we wouldn't have dared to dream about a couple of years ago, between robotics, automation, and rapid, accurate, and cost-effective disease and food safety diagnostics, vaccine development, communication technologies, could go on. You know, continued development and deployment and adoption of those technologies will help on the farm, but they'll also be key to getting production and extension information to the farm and information exchanged between operations as well as throughout the value chain. Collaborative research is going to be key to achieving these goals, and tech transfer is going to be critical to ensure adoption, and surveillance to monitor that adoption of those technologies and management practices is going to be key to measuring progress towards achieving these lofty goals. And those goals are also informing the current update of our national strategy. Now, these strategy consultations were conducted virtually over the last 6 months through focus group meetings involving about 200 people, but we also had an online open to anybody research priority survey. We got nearly 1,000 responses to that one, and over 600 of them were from producers, with the rest being researchers, funders, extension staff, other industry stakeholders. And all the input from that survey and the focus groups is informing the content of our new strategy, and that's going to guide our research and tech transfer investments, as well as those of other industry and government funders and the next beef cluster. And so with that, I'm out of slides, and I'll stop sharing my screen and let you carry on, Carl.
Thank you very much, Reynold. It's really interesting to see how strategy is evolving for BCRC and how it's informing current research priorities, how your network is expanded, especially for animal health, and how you're facilitating the tech transfer and dissemination of research through accessible means like blogging, videos, etc. So thank you very much for your presentation. To respond to Denise's questions, we are recording the session, and we will be providing a link to this session and the other ones for the summit shortly after we finish or after the summit is completed. So you'll be receiving a link by email should you wish to view it again. So Reynold, thank you again, and I will now ask Tania to proceed with her presentation. Tania. You're on mute, Tania.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks, Carl. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Today, I was asked to talk about the automation cluster, and I have to confess, I've changed it up a bit because the automation cluster is, you know, it's new and interesting. It's one of the newer clusters, as Tom mentioned, but it's a relatively small portion of what Vineland does as a whole. And, you know, as an organization, we've undergone recently a period of renewal. We have some new faces from the CEO down. We've refreshed our innovation strategy. So I wanted to go over a bit of that and make it kind of a forward-looking presentation about where we see the priority focus for horticulture. So, okay, is it moving? Nope. Okay, we're stuck here.
Tanya, with mine, I had to use my mouse and not the arrow buttons, if that helps.
Oh, really? Where do you click your mouse, though?
Well, I have a roller mouse, so I just rolled it.
Oh, there you go. Okay, thanks for that, Reynold. Okay, here we go. So I want to talk about innovation in horticulture. And I like to start here because some of you may be familiar with us as an organization. We've been around for about 12 years now. But for those of you who aren't, the whole reason that Vineland was created and why we exist, and certainly when we refreshed our strategy recently, we revisited this, but it holds true. The single reason Vineland is here is to improve the economic viability, sustainability, and competitiveness of horticulture in Canada. And we're a research and innovation centre, so we apply research and innovation solutions in order to do that. And this mission statement really guides everything we do, from the types of projects we work on, the people we work with, the way we plan our research, the collaborative teams that we put together. And so this really is, in essence, what Vineland is all about. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, from our perspective, what we see as the top priorities for innovation in horticulture. Now we're engaged with the sector at many different levels. You know, we partner with growers associations who invest in research and development with us directly, are involved in our projects, growers who test out products as they go through the developmental cycle. And it's a constant conversation with the sector about what are the needs and priorities, what's changing, and what's the need for focus. And so out of, you know, sort of that 10 years of those conversations and our experience in the sector, it really boils down to these 4 things. So I wanted to go over them today. The first one, which I think is no surprise to anyone, is the priority to automate to address labour, cost and availability. So in horticulture, unlike a lot of the rest of agriculture, horticulture is still largely done by hand. All of the crop management, manipulation, picking, harvesting, packing, a lot of that is still done by hand, and we know the labour availability is really challenging, as well as the cost is constantly going up. So this is an obvious area of need where automation has huge potential to address some of that need. The second one is about plant varieties, about breeding and variety development to optimise for Canadian conditions. Third is environment, climate change. Horticulture can be a solutions provider. So this is an interesting perspective to take, and there's a lot we can do to encourage the sector to be able to fulfill that need. And the fourth is a bit more specifically an opportunity for Canada is to move more crops into greenhouse production because of the efficiencies that can be created there. So we see these as top areas of focus. I wanted to dig a bit deeper. Labour and automation is, as I said, in all horticulture crops, it is the single largest production cost, whether it's greenhouse crops, tree fruit, vegetables, whatever. Labour is a huge portion of the production cost, which ranges from around 30%, as you can see in the pie chart here, to some of the other sectors where it can be as high as 60% of production cost is spent on labour. And so we know we need to automate. We've been we had projects in the automation space for a while now, and that was the impetus for us getting involved with an automation cluster, is putting together a package of projects to address a few specific applications in horticulture. But out of that, it's kind of interesting because one of the purposes of the clusters is to build a network. And so what we've been able to do through the cluster is plug our network into other networks. So we were one of the founding partners of the CAIN, Canadian Agricultural Automation and Intelligence Network based in Alberta. And so that's a $50 million initiative funded by AIC towards automation and digital technologies. And as well, we're connected through partnership with NGen, the Advanced Manufacturing Supercluster, where, as we speak today, we've got members of our business and automation team talking about the opportunities in agriculture to an audience of 3,000 odd automation companies. And so this is where it gets interesting, that a lot of what we need to achieve in agriculture isn't always about working with farmers. We have to think broadly about all the players in the sector. How can we work with them and partner with them to achieve success? And automation ultimately is a really great example of that, where we need the expertise in some of these Canadian companies to be able to develop, commercialize, sell, market and service the technologies to the growers. And so here is a couple of pictures of a cucumber harvesting system we're developing for greenhouse cucumber production. So it's a prototype. So you can see there on the right, it's, you know, it's kind of, it's a prototype, it looks like it, but we're able to get it now picking one cucumber every 11 seconds. It does need some work to get to full functionality, but we've been able to do that in the space of a few short years. And there's all kinds of examples of where technologies can have the potential to address some of these challenges. So the point we're at here is, you know, looking for the final commercialization partners, because ourselves as an innovation organization, we're a non-profit research institute. We can develop products, but ultimately need to partner to move them out to the marketplace. And so we take our prototype and we're talking to the automation companies to see who wants to take it to the next step and bring it to the marketplace, and we'll support them along the way to do that. The second priority we see is all about varieties. So breeding and variety development is not new. This is something certainly that Agriculture Canada has invested in for many, many years, and it's still an area of need and opportunity. And one thing that we've seen is, you know, in horticulture, there's a predominance of international seed companies and genetics owners who sell their genetics into Canada and are produced by Canadian growers. But ultimately, these genetics are not optimal for Canadian environments. And we see it in all kinds of examples. So this particular one is sweet potato, which Canadians consume around 90,000 tons of sweet potatoes every year. And that's a huge growth. In the past 10 years, that number has doubled, because as you probably are aware, sweet potato has become a very popular vegetable. So it's still growing. It's an enormous consumption in Canada, but most of that product is imported because sweet potato is a warm climate crop that grows best in the southern US. And so that's where we import most of it from. Some Canadian growers have been growing it, but ultimately, it's not optimized for the Canadian environment, and it performed poorly because basically the Canadian growing season is too short, and the genetic optimized for warm climate conditions didn't really perform in Canada. So about six or seven years ago, we started a breeding program. We brought a bunch of genetics in, we screened it, and started breeding sweet potato simply to select for shorter season production. And so in 2019, we released the first variety out of that breeding program called Radiance. And you can see in this picture up at the top right here, the two varieties on either side at the ends are your standard southern US sweet potato commercial varieties. And the one in the middle is Radiance, which is optimized for Canadian environment. And you can see from the picture alone, it's obvious that it reaches a much larger size in a shorter time. And so by the time of harvest, what we're able to see is with this optimized genetics, we get 20% higher yields. And so that's hugely significant for farmers. And you can see the chart here, which represents the income that generates for farmers. So the pale orange is the traditional southern variety, Covington, and the bright orange is Radiance. And so in the higher yields, the growers are able to produce more revenue. The cost of production is slightly higher, but ultimately the profit they are able to generate out of their acreage is much higher. And so this is what we can do with one variety. It was released in 2019, and we cannot keep up with the demand. The uptake on this has been enormous. And for last year, the production season, there was 2,200 acres of sweet potato produced. And this year, we're already sold out of the production, the propagative slips for this variety. So there's a real opportunity to do this. We've done it in sweet potato. We can do it in so many other crops. There's all these opportunities. Horticulture is hugely diverse. We've got 150 different fruit and vegetable crops alone. And there's enormous potential to simply produce optimized and adapted genetics for Canada's environment. And then of course, there's all the rest you can do, like optimizing for consumer traits, disease resistance, you know, all kinds of other traits that you can layer into that as well. So we see that as a huge area of a priority for Canada, and it's certainly an area that ourselves as an organization are focused on. Oops. The next one is about climate solutions. So horticulture can be a natural solutions provider. So trees are still the best technology we have for carbon capture. And so we can't forget this. We've known this for a long time, and there's all kinds of things we can do to encourage planting of trees and plants and ultimately green infrastructure. So this is really about the ornamental horticulture, and it's sort of transitioning away from the idea of ornamental horticulture to the idea that it's really functional horticulture. This is about using plants as green infrastructure to create environmental benefits in our cities, urban landscapes, and in the broader landscapes, putting plants to use in all kinds of creative ways to maximize the benefits of, you know, we know that trees, they can capture carbon from the atmosphere, but there's all kinds of other benefits. In cities, we have they regulate the temperature in cities, they create shade, wildlife habitats, they create green spaces that contribute to people's physical and mental well-being, as well as controlling water runoff and pollution. So there's huge benefits of green infrastructure. Cities recognize this, and it's a huge opportunity for the nursery growers and floriculture growers in Canada to provide the products to meet this increasing demand. And so in order to help them do that, we need to understand what are the right plants, the right soils, the right technologies, and the right designs to be able to use plants successfully in the landscape and in these infrastructure type applications. And ultimately, this leads to more resilient cities and landscape, which is something that we all understand we need. And certainly, as we talk about climate change, is increasingly at the forefront of the public conversation. Big opportunity for horticulture there. Then the fourth one specifically is about greenhouse production. So really the benefits here is in efficiency. So this is an example that I show here, comparing field tomato production versus greenhouse tomato production. So we know Canada has a big successful greenhouse tomato industry, and it's largely because of these advantages. So I just highlight the first line here, which shows a 10-fold increase in the yield per unit land area that you can get out of greenhouse production. And the second line also is important, is it expands the production season. So I talked earlier about short production seasons in Canada, and greenhouses are a way around that. It expands the production season by buffering against the climate and the pressures and stresses that the climate creates. And what it enables us to do is produce more locally to feed our own markets. You know, there's a lot of greenhouse production is very technology intensive. There's also disadvantages about it. You know, when we think about managing water and nutrient supply and recirculation and this type of thing, as well as energy use. So there's still a lot that needs to be done to optimize greenhouse production, but another big opportunity for Canada there. So those are the four top sort of high level priorities. Underneath that, there's all kinds of different research and innovation projects that you can come up with and ways to support those four things. But that's really where Vineland sees the need, and where going forward our efforts are going to be focused. And so in order to do that, you know, I mentioned we have new people at Vineland. We've built some new capacity, and basically all of the capacity we have is in a multidisciplinary array of researchers in all of these different areas. From plant variety development, we have breeders and pathologists and genomics and bioinformaticists. We've got the automation group who have engineers, specialists in vision systems and machine learning and robotics, as well as, you know, the traditional sort of biological and pest controls, nursery production, all of the array of different expertise that we need to put together cross-collaborative projects that could really deliver the impacts that we're looking for in horticulture. And the way we do that is a combination of different models. You know, we're a unique kind of research organization, and we can partner with organizations and businesses in all kinds of ways in order to get the research funded and make things go forward. So I think I'll probably leave it at that, and be happy to take any questions later.
Thank you very much, Tania. You've talked about partnership, about plugging your network with other ones, whether it's Kane or the advanced manufacturing superclusters, thinking about having to think broadly to achieve success. And I think it's no surprise to you or to members of our audience that this is a point that resonates strongly with AIC in general. So thank you for this presentation.
Thanks, Carl.
Before we move on to our third presentation from Stewart, I would just like to remind the audience that you're free to ask questions between now and the end of today's panel. We'll be taking your questions near the end of or after our fourth presentation. So Stewart, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carl. Certainly a pleasure to speak to you today. And I'm filling in for our general manager who took ill just a few days ago. And so I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but have a few remarks. Certainly appreciated the two presentations so far. I think Reynold knows that the Swine Innovation Porc Research Cluster aspires to be similar to BCRC when we grow up. Unfortunately, we haven't evolved or developed to the extent that BCRC has. And certainly, likely if imitation is the greatest form of flattery, there's a lot of ideas we take from what BCRC is doing and try to implement them in the swine sector. Certainly similar to the cattle sector, animal health is our big concern, and I don't think it takes anybody a lot of thinking to realize what's going on in China with African swine fever and how their pork industry has been decimated and its impact worldwide. And the thing that keeps me as a producer awake at night and as an industry awake is the probability of it ever being found in North America. And if it made its way into the wild pig population, similar to what has happened in Europe, it's marched across Europe in wild boars or wild pigs. It's very difficult to control, almost impossible. And when Canada's pork industry relies close to 70% of all pork that we produce on export markets to find a home, the probability of if it ever happened in Canada, it would decimate our pork industry for at least a generation. And so it appears it becomes a big priority and concern, but at the same time, it is an international priority, and we are trying to collaborate and try to find our sweet spot as a producer organization, trying to find how we can collaborate with others to do our part in terms of research and the science solutions that are being looked at. And I maybe give a personal example. We have been sponsoring rope tests, and this is a way of determining positive pigs in a pen environment, detecting them early before you see obvious signs of disease, and you can do PCR analysis on the saliva and determine whether it's present in the barn or in the pen. And we were made aware of course, through CFIA and collaboration with the Americans of trying to do some testing in Vietnam where they're positive. We also became aware with High Life, a large integrated producer in Manitoba, that they have production facilities in China. And on a call last 2 weeks ago, we're in conversation about trying to do some testing and development in China. And the interesting piece there was their biggest concern now of the reemergence of African swine fever in China is variants. It is genetic variants that have a portion of the genome missing, and it would appear somebody's doing some gene editing of the genome and trying to use them as a vaccine to prevent it. And it's the variants now that are creating the problem. They are more difficult to detect, especially using the primers that they were using in their PCR tests. And that is giving them more problem than the original disease. And it is, again, an example of where science can help, but science, if it's applied wrong, can be a challenge and a problem. And as such, I think there's a cautionary note there to us. And hopefully we can help. They were interested in what primers they were using at the level 4 lab in Winnipeg, and what is accepted in North America as the best primers. And they were different than what they're using in China, and they're hopefully getting greater sensitivity out of that. All to say, I think there are solutions that science offers, but they have to be tested properly as well. And I think the other area that is a big concern for us is PRRS. It's a very common, it's an endemic disease in North America and around the world. Porcine respiratory and reproductive syndrome is common. Some of the vets in Canada talk about the American strain that speaks American as compared to a much softer, less virulent Canadian strain. And it continues to cause disruptions in supply and deaths, abortions, etc. And again, gene editing has provided solutions in F1 gilts that could prevent the disease from expressing itself. But again, it hasn't yet been approved, or people are concerned about if they were using that, whether the customer would accept and purchase pork that had the deleted genes in the pork that they were eating. So I think it's, again, this question of acceptance of science as we move forward. Science can provide solutions, but will the consumer ultimately accept it? Gene editing is accepted in plants. We have it on the table for consumers. In animals, we might be a few years away from general widespread acceptance of that. And then I guess the third, or the other item under animal health, I would say, is that COVID, with the vaccines that have been developed in a rapid manner, may inform us, and we may get ultimate benefit in the animal sector from the collaboration that's occurred, international collaboration that's occurred in the development of the new platform of vaccines. And so often it's the other way around. Developments on the animal side inform over a 10-year period. The human side, I think the reverse might be the example with the millions that have been pumped into COVID work in the research in the last year and a half. And so there might be benefits that trickle down to the animal side. And that's what we're hearing out of Vito and Saskatoon, and that there is spin-off benefits. So animal health is very high on our priority as we look at diseases that significantly impact pork. And the microbiome has been an area of high emphasis this last cluster for us, realizing that antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial use is a concern, widespread, and we have to reduce our usage of antimicrobials. And can we do manipulation of the microbiome to reduce our dependency on antibiotics? And I think that is likely a longer term study. It's not quick answers or quick solutions. It can be informed with what the poultry industry is doing, what other industries animal industries are doing. And I think, again, collaboration on this area is across species is very beneficial. Climate change, I think the area that is the second area that I've highlighted, certainly carbon neutral, life cycle analysis, all the buzzwords that I think we've heard and are aware of. Certainly manure management and recycling. Phytase enzyme, which is standard in most pig feeds today, has reduced the amount of phosphorus in pig manure. So that as a result, more of it can be used on a continuing basis to grow a crop of corn without seeing phosphorus build up in the soil. So that has been a benefit. And then hopefully we get less runoff if it's managed properly into lakes and streams. The continuing issue always for pig manure is if it didn't have a smell, it would be less of a problem. Certainly in a highly populated area like Southern Ontario, there continues to be problems with approval of new pig barns and neighbors objecting to their newly constructed home in the country with their deck and the significant smell that pig manure periodically impinges on their outdoor activities. So if we ever can solve that in an acceptable manner, it likely would be an area of welcomed relief. Certainly injecting it in the soil has been a big benefit. Industry sustainability, I think meat is just another protein. Unfortunately, we're not the Cadillacs of protein like the beef is. We are kind of in the mushy middle, so to speak. Pulled pork has helped us out, and certainly the advantages of a shoulder with lots of marbling has been something that's an advantage to us. And everybody loves bacon, and it's imitated in a lot of different forms. So that carries the value of the carcass to a great degree. But as well, certainly the idea of how do we improve the quality of the product? How do we look at getting value for the carcass? And certainly the export market to Japan, which is the highest value market in the world. We passed the US 2 years ago in value of exports to Japan, and we're a tenth of the size of the US. And that was quite an accomplishment because of the quality of pork that we were shipping to Japan. Certainly our size allows the processors to do more manual sorting to get the cuts that are in demand in Japan. The question that we've always looked at is, can we get a grading system for individual cuts that would, and some type of automatic sorting in the processing plant that would do it without the labor input? And that's some of the research that we have going on under the current cluster. So industry sustainability, no different than what has been mentioned in Reynold's presentations. We don't have the nice views of pigs out on pasture and all those wonderful things. We have these bomb shelters that we call hog barns that are made of concrete, and people wonder what's going on inside. And they break in the odd time to do a review of animal care, and certainly animal care and how we communicate to the public. Ultimately, if they're going to pay for our product, we have to be good communicators of farm practices. And one of the things we have just completed is a call for proposals on some animal welfare projects that will inform the next code review in terms of getting new information in terms of the code review that is upcoming. I'll end up with stakeholder collaboration. I think we don't have the resources in the pork sector to fully fund the portion that is to be private funding in the clusters. We've relied on the researchers to bring stakeholders to the table for a portion of it. And that can vary depending on the requirement in the various clusters. The last cluster, we were required to find 33% in private funding. And we informed our researchers that they would need to bring 25% of that to the table. It's hoped that our national checkoff that it was just approved by the current government will assist us in being able to fund a greater percentage of the future clusters, as well as respond to priorities in the off-cluster years. Right now, 25 cents of every market hog marketed in Canada goes to fund national research. And that's currently what is collected across Canada. And that is what it's used to be part of our private funding to run swine innovation pork, as well as fulfill some of the needs. But we need stakeholders to come alongside, and it's often left to the researchers to leverage their stakeholders that they've worked with in the past to provide some of that funding. One of the things we found very useful on the second cluster and have tried to maintain it prior to COVID in the third cluster is the idea of getting researchers who are involved in a similar project together and having meetings at least once annually centering on the project. And it incurs costs, travel costs. Now with virtual, Zoom as being a platform that we can use, we likely won't travel as often. But really what it allowed the researchers to do is get out of their silos. We found Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada's researchers weren't as well informed with other researchers from other universities and institutions from across Canada. And this is a forum where if they were working on the same project, they could compare best management analysis in terms of how to tease out the results they were looking for in the studies, what worked, what didn't work. I'll send you samples. I know your lab set up for this. I'll do analysis for these other samples because my lab is set up for that. And it allows junior researchers who are new to the area to get mentored and exposed to senior researchers. And I think that's a real advantage to the industry in terms of development of researchers and development of team approaches to research challenges of the future. The final area that we implemented this last time was putting a meeting together with research directors of the various research stations across Canada. We got together with them at least once a year to try to get them to implement or to discuss best management practices of what their experiences have been with what they have experiences have been with their running their research stations and the challenges they face in their individual research stations. And that was very helpful. The research station managers really appreciated it. They had the opportunity of comparing notes with other research station managers from across Canada. And one of the outcomes was on the animal care committees, the recommendation that that there would be put on that the National Animal Care Committee, somebody from the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council who understood livestock farming. Sorry for that. Can't control phones. Sorry about that. So basically, that is the outcome, and that recommendation has gone forward. The concern was producers were expressing was we're making the research stations so dissimilar from commercial operations that the results aren't applicable to commercial agriculture. So that's a big concern as we look forward. We certainly have to bear in mind proper animal care. I'm not suggesting not, but it's another concern we have to make sure that it isn't too far removed from where the industry is or is going to be into the future. So thank you, everyone, and I'm certainly open for questions later.
Thanks very much, Stewart. This is a presentation that has covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting ground. I've noticed in particular some interesting examples regarding animal health of how science can help, but also be a hindrance if used improperly. As you said, science can provide solutions, but it has to be tested properly. Also interesting to note your point about science having to be accepted by consumer, especially when we think of more cutting edge advances in places like gene editing. So thank you very much for your presentation, Stewart. Now, last but not least, I'll invite Stephen to give his presentation. Stephen.
Great, thank you, Carl. And it's actually great to be the last guy on the panel because everybody has introduced the importance of innovation, some of the risks associated with innovation, and more importantly, all of the panelists have talked about the need for partnership. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, I got the thumbs up. A little bit about the Global Institute for Food Security is we're somewhat like what Tania said about Vineland. We're a public-private partnership between Nutrien, the province, and the University of Saskatchewan, and we were established in 2012. So we're in our ninth year. And again, the purpose for us being created was to act as a bridge. And we too have gone through a renewal, if you will, of our strategic plan as well. You know, you got a new CEO, you got to have a new strategic plan. I mean, that's kind of like putting on a new pair of boots sort of thing. Our vision, which helps inspire us, is a world where everyone has access to safe and nutritious food. And our mission drives us. It dictates, like Tania said, everything Vineland does, it drives how we work as well. And we see our mission as we need to work with partners to discover, develop, and deliver innovative solutions for the production of globally sustainable food. And that discover, develop, and deliver is critical for us. Where we see the future, 2025 and beyond, we see Canada ranking very high on the innovation efficiency outcomes. We see Canada as a global leader in ag and food technology. We see Canada helping advance our vision where a world as everyone has access to safe and nutritious food. And we see an ecosystem of stakeholders that work interdependently and deliver innovative solutions. And we've heard from all the other speakers, like Stewart and I didn't prep beforehand where he would talk about how the Ag Canada guys didn't know what was happening at this university. This silo challenge is something that we have in front of all of us. And we've all heard today about how we're breaking that down. Reynold talked about, holy cow, we're working with Ducks Unlimited. Wouldn't have thought about that 15 years ago. So again, we need partners. The challenge we face in Canada is that our track record in innovation is not very good. We invest a lot. We are 9th in the world in investments in research, but our research outcomes and research innovation efficiency, which are measures of things that actually make it to market and make a difference, are 30th and 60th. So if you think of us as the G20, We're not even in the top 20. There's an opportunity to do better. The way we measure success at GIFs is the way everybody else measures innovation success: patents, licenses, new companies starting up, commercialization, job creation, new products and services that are in the marketplace that make a difference in terms of the economic, environmental, and social performance and sustainability of producers, processors, all the way through the value chain. The good news is the ag and food innovation ecosystem is not worse than the rest in Canada, but we're not better than the rest in Canada. And some of the challenges the other speakers have talked about, we are dispersed. And Reynold talked about how they started the cow-calf survey in Western Canada and now have expanded it across all of Canada, which is fantastic. We have local needs that need to be tied into a national framework. Each of us tends to work semi-independently, and all of us have talked about how we've tried to break these barriers down. Innovation is a team sport. We heard Tania talk about they're developing the prototype to pick greenhouse cucumbers. Now they need partners down the stream. So none of us can do it on our own. We see Global Institute for Food Security as helping play that role, like the other organizations that have spoken today, about being a connector and a catalyst, connecting stakeholders together. And that diversity of stakeholders is really, really important, like some of the other speakers have talked about. We see the opportunities to spark sustainable innovation here in Canada. It's not just words. It's really important for us as a country to be leaders in this space, driving commercialization and outcomes, not just outputs, but real outcomes, and bridging the challenges we face, or the opportunities, I guess, with new and innovative solutions. We are a connector. The way we help advance innovation today is through the application of our expertise and specialized facilities. And I'll talk a little bit about our at-scale platform technologies that are focused on addressing some of the issues that all the other speakers have talked about: climate change, carbon sequestration, climate resiliency for crops. We bridge commercialization. We work with partners all the way up and down the value chain, from the lab bench all the way to the products that are in the marketplace today. And then the other thing that we do as an organization is we've been able to parlay our technical capabilities and unique attributes as a way to help catalyze additional trade. And we do have a relationship with the Bangladesh Ministry of Agriculture, which has helped spur more trade and export, particularly for wheat, canola, and pulses into Bangladesh. And again, thinking about it as a Team Canada sport, where we can take advantage of our unique innovation capabilities to couple it to help drive trade, is a good thing for everybody in the ecosystem. Priority 2 that we have is the innovation pipeline. So one of the things that we've done as part of our new strategy is every project we have has to have a path to impact. It's no longer sufficient to be doing, well, that's cool science. It needs to have, because of the cautionary tale that Stewart mentioned, we need to know what is the path to impact, who are the stakeholders that we need to engage kind of up front before we go, here, ta-da, here's our baby, can you take it? We want to be working with the market, working with all the stakeholders up and down the value chain. One of the reasons Canada's innovation gap exists is we invest a lot at the front end on knowledge creation, and we have an industry that's really good on the back end, but in that middle, those technology readiness levels that are really that translational space from I have an invention to I have an innovation which makes market impact. And Stewart and I were talking beforehand, something like Chrome, which he's planting on his farm today, there was a major effort spent in the gap to figure out how to make it from a really cool invention to a product. And that is something that we need to figure out. How do we address effectively in Canada? The gap's also referred to as the Valley of Death, which is kind of a cool name. But why is it a valley? Why is it a gap? It's because typically out of universities, government labs, researchers, scientists, we tend to look at the problem purely from a technical perspective. And the reality is, and Stewart hit on this during his last talk, as did Reynold right at the beginning, that the issues are capability, capacity, infrastructure. The gap and the issues are more than just technical. There's market acceptance, regulatory, and scale up. We recognize, and many stakeholders across the ag and tech innovation ecosystem here in Canada know about this gap. And we've seen other business verticals, such as the technology and pharmaceutical businesses, apply systems like incubators and accelerators to help bridge the gap. It doesn't work for ag and food tech. I've been here. I've done this. And the reason is fundamental. There's structural differences in our industry. And it makes those types of models, as they are in these other business verticals, they don't really help us address the gap. Different systems of support are required to help drive innovation. What are the structural differences? Timelines are longer. I mean, we need like 2 years of field data to know that we actually have a potential product candidate. You cannot accelerate 2 years of field data here in Canada. And definitely this year in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, it reminded me you cannot do anything in the field until the snow melts and it's no longer -40. Funding levels are higher for ag tech because of these timeline differences. The third bullet point is super critical. Most people that have never done it don't recognize that there's no pre-competitive space in ag tech even when we compare to pharma. Regulatory bottlenecks and public acceptance issues occur early in the process, and it can really impact late stage. Again, the PRRS example of an elegant solution to a really problematic disease in swine production has some major issues related to public acceptance. Stewart hit on it this last talk. We tend to focus too much, as I mentioned, as new innovative technologies and scientists on the pure tech play. Again, we need to recognize that consumer acceptance is such a huge issue. And the other thing that's really important that affects our ability to manage the gap relates to valuation jumps. In the pharma industry, there's really well understood and defined valuation jumps as you move down the innovation pipeline. For ag tech, it doesn't exist. It's less defined. There's opportunity. Now, the good news for ag tech is there is lots of money globally being invested in ag tech. Canada doesn't get its fair share of that investment today. So one of the things that we believe that's necessary to help drive the ag tech and food sector is more than just accelerators and incubators. We're helping catalyze this ecosystem. We are creating our own not-for-profit product development entity. It's part of our strategy. It's part of when we were created back in 2012. It was envisioned we would need different commercial vehicles to be able to move technology forward. We're also in partnership with AgWest Bio, a major sponsor of this event, to create the Ag and Food Advancement Partnership. And again, it's something that helps address the unique structural features and challenges faced by ag tech. Accelerators and incubators tend to be like a class. You go in as a cohort. The Advancement Center, and for what ag tech needs, is much more custom relationships, longer term relationships, more investment, focus on advancing the technology through the innovation pipeline versus just what's your business case, what's your strategic plan, and strength from the team that's being built around the Ag and Food Advancement Center to help navigate the commercialization process. Because I've mentioned I've done this, I've done it 3 times. 2 were successful, 1 was not successful. The one that didn't succeed was the market, because of the market. Wonderful technical success, not a commercial success. And the other issue that's really important in ag and food tech is we need to be able to understand, does this scale? So one of the things that, again, not that I didn't listen to the other people that talked, but Stewart hit something on the impact of the COVID-19 vaccine development program, and particularly because Volker Gertz and Vito is our big brother institute here in Saskatoon. The ability to scale mRNA vaccines is a wonderful opportunity for animal health and human health. And that scalability issue is something most folks in the ag and food tech space don't really think about. And I've seen products in my former employer where we had the best technical feature, but we couldn't manufacture it. We couldn't produce it. So we ended up, it got abandoned along the way. So that scale up is something that needs to be addressed quickly. The other priority that we have is back to the scale issue, is building scale. One of the things as part of our new strategy is we've created technology platforms. And these are resources that we can use to help accelerate, add scale, and increase our impact, and not just the impact of gifts, but impact of our partners up and down the value chain, and enhance synergy in our ecosystem. Our lead platform, which we announced the hard launch in January of this year, is the Omix and Precision Ag laboratory. It's a state-of-the-art facility, one of its kind in Canada, one of its kind really almost in North America, that offers a one-stop complete analysis of microbial, plant, and animal samples. Some of the picture of the piece of equipment is technology that engineers and computer scientists that are part of our plant and imaging research center have developed to be able to do phenotyping in the field to accelerate breeding. We're the only facility that provides that ability to go from the composition of the material, whether it's plant DNA, all the way to the analysis of the grain through the phenotypes in the field. We work with partners in national research labs and universities across Canada, private companies in Canada, the US, and the EU. And this is an example of synergy where the University of Saskatchewan, Ag Canada, and the National Research Council of Canada came together to create this, because no one entity could do this on their own. GIFS runs this for the organization. And one thing that this is an important asset for Canada, not just for ag and food and not for the West, it's a Canadian asset. Because one of the things that we learned from COVID-19 is that we were on the sidelines because of some regulatory hurdles. As the country and various jurisdictions ramped up testing capability for COVID-19, we lent equipment to the Saskatchewan Health Authority from our lab to help scale up testing in the province. We also lent materials and supplies. But our lab, which routinely runs thousands of samples, was parked. So we, as a country, I think ag and food is not only important from the recovery aspect that Tom mentioned earlier from the impact of COVID-19, an opportunity for us to be leaders internationally, but I think ag tech is a great resource for Canada from a national strategic reserve perspective. We can fund and run at scale that's required for pandemic response and peacetime. So we're contributing to economic growth and value creation. And we need to find the ability to redeploy in times of a crisis. And the one that I worry about is the African swine fever one that Stewart mentioned. Again, pandemics are not just people. They affect animals and they affect plants. We need to be prepared. The other platform that I wanted to mention is our engineering biology platform. And this is a sector, a technology space that's going to transform how we do work and how it's seen as the next industrial revolution. McKinsey has predicted it's going to contribute $2 to $4 trillion more in the next 10 to 20 years. We've already seen in the last week alone the kind of money that's flowing into this space from the private sector perspective, with companies like Ginkgo having valuations of $15 billion on their IPO. We use automation, biology, and computational, like machine learning and AI. It's ABC 1, 2, 3. And it allows us to iterate the design, build, test, learn cycle, and it's going to impact everything that we do, from our sector, the ag and food sector, to health and medicine, to energy, to environmental biotech. We see the engineering biology platform not only as a way to make food production more efficient and increase the nutritional value of how we currently produce it, but we also see it as a vehicle that's going to create new entries into the ag and food sector. Again, new food ingredients, moving to more farmed, not farm food from large production systems, but we're also seeing the emergence of plant substitutes for meat. And I know I got a beef and a hog guy, and I'm confess I love beef, and nothing better than smoked pork product is, but again, we do see the opportunity for alternative meats coming in, and it's going to be one of the options and a choice that I think we cannot run away from, and Canada needs to take a leadership position in this. And also one of the areas that we're fascinated with, and Vineland is in a leadership position, is around greenhouses and vertical farms as a way to address kind of the food sustainability and production needs. Our platform, Engineering Biology, fits into our suite of technology platforms. It fits nicely with our Opal genomic sequencing. It allows us to leverage expertise and capabilities, and it fits in with our data management piece. And Tom mentioned the superclusters. And we do have a project with, projects with two of the superclusters, the Digital Supercluster and Protein Industry Canada, through a relationship with Precision AI. And that's where the application of our Opal Lab and our data management and analytics platform have been super critical to help with better decision-making tools for producers, so that we're applying the right products at the right time in the right locations. So in conclusion, we all have a role to play in ag and food research and innovation here in Canada. We have in Canada real strengths as a powerhouse for sustainable agriculture. We need to appreciate the impact our sector has on the economic, environmental, and social sustainability, not only here of Canada, but we are an export nation. It's critical that we have access to these export markets. We've heard that from Reynold and Stewart. One of the key things that we see as an opportunity for our sustainability leadership is the ability to measure. One of the challenges we have is we have at best national or maybe regional measurements. Those are not actionable for farmers. We need local. We need a national framework, but locally relevant data. We need the ability, like Reynold had mentioned, the ability to be able to measure things like carbon sequestration. It's not just good enough to model it, but we need to be able to validate it. Canada enjoys a place in the international community as a trusted supplier of quality. We need to take that advantage and create more opportunity for us. One of the things that GIFS is proud to be part of, along with producer groups, industry, NGOs, and like the Aero Food Center at the University of Guelph, is we're partners in the National Sustainability Index for Ag Performance. And again, a framework that brought a coalition of very diverse partners, kind of what Reynold talked about earlier, that all share a common desire to be able to create an ecosystem that is economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable. So again, we see the opportunity for all of us across the value chain, up and down, to help establish our leadership role. And just as a blatant plug for the Global Institute for Food Security, we're open for business. And if you want to partner with us, or you have ideas that you want to discuss, feel free to get to our website or email us at partnerwithus@gifs.ca. We have an ideas portal that has garnered lots of great input and suggestions from here and also around the world. So thanks everybody for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to questions.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Again, very interesting presentation there. Interesting to remind ourselves how much we invest in knowledge creation and commercialization, but comparatively less into the development leading to that commercialization, or as you said, the valley of death. Interesting to see how GIFS is catalyzing innovation to help bridge that gap. So thank you for that presentation, Stephen. So I would now like to invite members of the audience to ask their question. Once again, you can use the Q&A button or the raise hand button if you would prefer to ask your question to our panelists verbally. So as we wait for those questions to trickle in, I'll ask one myself. And this is to all of the panelists, and it goes back to a point that Tom had made in his opening presentation about the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. So the title of the summit this year is looking ahead to 2025, and with the Canadian Agricultural Partnership coming to term in 2023, I'm wondering if you have any ideas that you're able to share as to what should be considered as a program or the partnership gets renewed, particularly but not exclusively for the AgriScience cluster program. So maybe we'll start with Reynold and then go to Tania next. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I can start out with a couple. These aren't my ideas. Anybody who knows me knows that I work with Andrea Brocklebank, who is smarter than most of us put together, I'd have to say. But one of the things that we've been involved in clusters and the AgriScience program since the very start. And in the first iteration of the science clusters was a nightmare in terms of it's a new program, there's new forms, there's new procedures, and blah, 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 blah. And it took us, in the second cluster, there was still some renewal. This time, they've now, Ag Canada, the programs branch, has the procedures down. They've got the admin working really well. And so one thing I would really strongly encourage or really would like to see is we don't need to tear this whole thing down and rebuild it. It's working now. So tweaks are always needed, but wholesale renovation isn't. Another is improvement that we've seen over time is just the speed of approvals in terms of making sure that, these things always start on April 1st. So ideally the start date of the next one will be April 1st, 2023. So plan backwards to make sure that clusters are approved and contracts are signed such that actual research projects can start on April 1st, because when things get delayed, then postdocs don't get paid, and then those postdocs look for other jobs, and then we partly lose capacity and also lose research progress. So that's another one. There's probably a couple other key ones, but hopefully by my rambling, I've given Stewart and Tania and Stephen time to think of a couple of the ones that I've missed.
Thanks, Reynold. Tania.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in. I think, the administration of it, I agree with Reynold. It's working well. And I certainly think that the AgriScience programming in general is really great from Agriculture Canada. And I would like to specifically reference both streams. So, we talked about clusters today, but there's also AgriScience projects. And to me, there's real value in the combined approach, because the clusters are a way to invest strategically across a sector in a bunch of things, but the projects enable Ag Canada to pick some winners, to make bigger, longer-term strategic investments in some areas that they can see that really need to move forward. So I think the combined approach of those two programming streams is a really good thing, and I hope to see that continue. And the other recommendation I would have is what Steve talked about, the Valley of Death. And think for Agriculture Canada to think about how to address that, because I think the clusters program has evolved somewhat over the years, but it is still fairly traditional in the upstream academic space, as well as the downstream, very practical on-farm type space. But that area in the middle is new and different. And certainly it's been our experience working in automation and technology development that we really need to find new ways of working with the private sector. And whether it's your little startups or established SMEs, there's a lot of resources here in Canada, these companies, and we need to be able to tap into them. We need to find ways to engage them in research and innovation. And I think the AgriScience programming has great potential to do that. And it's just, I think, a matter of getting some of these government policy people and people who design the programs thinking creatively about how we can facilitate and incentivize engagement with some of these companies. So that'd be my two.
Apologies, I was muted. Thank you, Tania. Stewart, any thoughts, and then we'll go to Stephen next.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've aspired to as well is working together with other clusters and going across laterally across common interests that would apply. I think there's a number of things that we see in common with the poultry industry because our barns look very similar, particulate, some of the human health concerns internally in barns. But how you work out the mechanics of that, we've always stumbled at that. And when push came to shove, how do you get to manage that those dollars, and who applies it, who tells everybody what to do? So it's the mechanics of the day-to-day. And we've always said that would make a lot of sense. We've heard it as an encouragement from Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada. We've run into it as a problem. I know when prior or after in my Ontario hat on, after Vineland's creation, we looked at trying to have a virtual one for livestock, where it was similarly trying to have research projects that would cut across a variety of livestock species. Elric was the name of the creation, but never really caught traction with people. Tended to be very much commodity focused, even though there was commonality in issues. I think I can give credit to Cornelia Creplan and Dr. John Webb for suggesting a food cluster where there would be the opportunity of pre-competitive research done. And I think as a result of some of the pushing that Ontario did, that was created during the second iteration of clusters. So I think there's the ability to do that would be very helpful. And I agree with Dr. Webb about these accelerator. I'm in the neighborhood of University of Waterloo, and ad nauseum I hear of the Accelerator Institute and how great a model it is and wonderful things they're doing. And why doesn't biology and agriculture take the same model? I'm glad to hear somebody who's lived the experience to indicate that a lot of the advances in agriculture are incremental. And how do we give attribution to those advances? It's the slow and steady that yields the results. I don't know, that's a lot of rambling, but I give real credit to Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada for instituting cluster initiative and demand-driven research. I think that's a very significant step, and I give them full credit for that.
Thank you, Stewart. Stevens, any thoughts?
Yeah, just one thing, accelerators and incubators work great in those technologies clusters like Stewart mentioned, and the guys at Waterloo are telling the truth. Their experience is positive, but we got to realize that one size doesn't fit all. And that's one. I think a focus on that translational space is really important. And like Tania had mentioned, how do you bring more people together? And again, it's a team sport. When Reynold started the Q&A piece on don't fix it, it ain't broke. I think that's great advice, and it should be kudos to Ag Canada for some of the wonderful positive feedback that they've heard today. And I think that's a testimony to the investment. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. We have a question from Blair Goldite. He's asking if our speakers could comment on the importance of the AgriScience cluster programming continuing to be industry-led, recognizing the importance and requirement of alignment with AAFC priorities as well. Would anyone like to start?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. I think industry-led is critical because the industry know what they need, where the opportunities are. They're going to be asked to co-invest. So the leadership absolutely needs to be there. I think there's different ways to do it though. And I think we've probably seen in the evolution of the AgriScience programming that traditionally industry meant producer groups and the producer groups who have checkoffs and they determine their priorities and they invest. But the ag sector, industry or sector, whatever you want to call it, is bigger than just the producing end. You know we talk about agri-food now, we talk about food processing, but we also have to think about the input suppliers. And, you know, these are the technology companies that I've been talking about a bit, whether it's a seed company or a robotics manufacturer or whatever, they're a critical part of the sector. And so we have to think about the industry in its broadest sense and not always just about the producer groups, because the other thing, you know, I talked a little bit about the clusters versus AgriScience projects. You know, this is a way you can address both things. You can give the producer groups what they need and in their priorities, but also Ag Canada can consider what their own priorities are. And like I said earlier, pick some winners, you know, make some bold bets on some things that they, you know, really see the long-term vision and opportunity to move the sector forward. So I think there's ways to do it, and a balanced approach is right.
Thanks, Tania. Stewart, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I again want to circle back. I always made a point to, I had the privilege of being there for the announcements to the swine sector, and thank the federal minister personally for the cluster program. I've seen trying to as well, had a history in Ontario, heading up Ontario Porc's Research Committee, and saw when the individual provinces had their own research initiatives and there was duplication across the country. And having a national program, unfortunately, what you have is the ability to collect levies is at the provincial level, and they have to agree to play in the same sandbox nationally. And fortunately, it was money that brought them to the sandbox to a degree to do research together. And so I think one of the things that's unique about I don't know if it's totally unique, but between 35 and 40% of the pork industry in Canada is vertically integrated with a processor. And so, and they're paying checkoffs in more than one province. They have owned pigs in several provinces. And their question, and I've heard them ask it at roundtables, is why should we be paying funds to support provincial organizations when majority of the issues are national in nature? And I think eventually we're going to see that question has to be resolved, because empires, some view empires are being built. I'm not sure I'd say this in a meeting of pork individual provincial pork organizations, because they are our owners. But at the end of the day, it's likely going to be a question somebody's going to be asking long term, and it's going to have to evolve, because a lot of the issues that are being faced are national in nature. They're not regional. National solutions, regional implementation. That's what we used to talk about at the Canadian Swine Health Board. So they might be different how you implement scientific solutions, but how you solve them is very common across the country.
Yeah, I like that concept, Stewart, of national framework, locally relevant.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't make sense locally, it doesn't get implemented, and all of the best intentions that's another output and not an outcome and impact that we're after.
No.
One thing that I would think about, and kind of Tania mentioned about the from a sector perspective, we see new players entering into the ag and food sector that we haven't seen before. And we've seen, like here in Canada, TELUS has made a significant investment in this space. We've seen Microsoft, Amazon, others play in this space. I think, how do we create how do we make sure the tent's big enough to bring everybody together, I think is super important. The other thing that I think a lot about, and again, I had a chance yesterday to participate in a discussion group with Cappy, is the idea of One Health. And we tend to think about One Health in terms of humans, but again, the animal health aspects, the plant health aspects, the role that what we eat influences our health. So it's not just calories, but it's the nutritional components that are so important. I think thinking along those lines and strategically, I also think Canada, we do a very good job here, but I think we need to be a little more assertive internationally. We don't need to apologize. We need to be bold. And again, I think we have a lot to offer. We are incredibly productive, and our environmental footprint is one of the best in the world in terms of ag and food production. And I think we need to be able to tout that. And like Tom had mentioned earlier about the importance of climate change, ag is one of the big industries that can make a contribution to we're part of the solution. We're not part of the problem. And we need to be seen in that context, and we need to position ourselves in that context, because I think we can offer an awful lot for both in terms of economic and environmental outcomes for the country. I look forward to the opportunity to be part of that partnership to get it going.
Thanks, Stephen. Reynold, you have the final word.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think industry leadership it can't be dismissed. I mean, obviously Agriculture Canada and the university environment has the infrastructure, and they have the scientists, and they have a lot more money than industry groups, but they also have the mandate to support agricultural research and improvements in productivity, competitiveness, sustainability, and all that sort of thing. But governments also have their own internal priorities, and I think that's where some of the friction sometimes comes, right? That well, governments want going off in this direction, but agriculture's over here. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that even though industry groups don't have the infrastructure or the scientists or the dollars, what we do have is an understanding of how shared government industry priorities can actually be implemented on the ground in practice. So I don't, pushing a rope uphill is often not, a real productive activity. So I think industry leadership is kind of essential. I think producer leadership, producer group leadership there's a good reason for that. And I think one of the tricky things that would need to be navigated, at least in the beef industry, I suspect some of the others, in expanding beyond the producer group side of things. Sorry, I've got a dog here. Is that typically the sorts of things that are supported by the cluster and other programs have a pretty strong public good element, right? And so they're public tax dollars, and they're going towards generating things that benefit everybody, or that could conceivably be implemented by everybody. And one of the trickier things that could arise is that when you start to involve some of these bigger players, is they've got a private profit motive, which isn't a bad thing, but it raises a question about whether, well, is this where public dollars should be going, especially when some of those players are pretty big multinational groups that where the benefits may not just benefit Canada. So just sort of a tricky waters to navigate there in my mind.
Excellent. Oh, Stewart, go ahead.
Yeah, I know one of the things that we have tried to look at from a cluster point of view is realizing that if we're trying to leverage public dollars, that the thing we can offer maybe large companies is first to market. Eventually, the results are going to be released publicly, but what we can give you if you partner with us and put some dollars on the table is be first to market with some technology and get a jump on your competitors. And so I think that's one of the things that we've tried to look as a carrot. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think a bigger question I'd have, and this is a plant and animal question, is as we look at the cost of running a research farm at the university level, especially if it's funded strictly by the university, it can be a target for cuts in an environment post-COVID. You know, that's the other trickle effect is how secure is animal research facilities down the road? In Ontario, we've been fortunate to have it funded by all taxpayers in the province. I think Quebec is the same. I know it's not the same in Manitoba, and I know it's not the same in Saskatchewan. So there's different models, and the cost of running animal research facilities is dollar intensive. And so I think what does post-COVID look like? That's one of the things we're thinking about at the swine cluster, and thinking we're going to have to look at private stakeholders increasingly. And if we did a bit of a survey with Australia, with the Netherlands, with the UK, and increasingly you see public funds being backed out of animal research, and more it's either a function of the private sector or large companies. And in the Netherlands, a lot of the swine research is coupled with breeding companies, because they're collecting data anyways to determine sire lines, etc. They're in a position to do other research at the same time, and it gives them an additional revenue stream at these farms. So what does the future hold? I don't know. I hope it doesn't change too much, but I also know what budgets look like as a result of the spending spree we've been on. And I can only imagine there's going to be outcomes because of that.
Thanks, Stewart. On that note, Reynold, Tania, Stewart, Stephen, thank you so much for your presentations today. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again during our next panel, which we'll hold this Friday to continue the conversation with more of AgriScience clusters. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye.
Well, thank you.
Reynold, are you gonna, oh, Reynold's gone already, sorry. I was gonna poke him about